Well, all right. Hard to believe this is our last, I think, our last class or last topic. I want to do something a little different. It is kind of I don't know, a vision of mine that maybe in the future people will, have read the chapter or watched the video, and then during the class, what we would just do is kind of a big integrative follow along. So that's my goal today. So I've got an app we're gonna make that'll integrate most of the key features, the remaining key features from the chapter 13, but then also end with a bang or a boom in the form of an explosion, which is chapter 14. So you'll get a little taste of chapter 14 as well. If you want to follow along, I do have a resource download for you to get you started. So if you go to the main landing page on Canvas and look at today, there's a zip file, boom.zip. Here's the app. I worked on this just last night and made a surprising number of stupid mistakes. And I'm going to probably, for this video, use my screen recording space for content rather than me. So my face will not be, good news, my face will not be on the screen as much. Here's the version that I worked on last night. And I've been playing around with variations in terms of what we should actually go for, in terms of these are the features that I want. But in general, what I'm going to try to do is get a lockbox on the screen, give it a health bar, and then we're going to drop magic balls on it, and they're going to do damage to the lockbox. And you can see that as they're hitting the lockbox is turning red, and the health bar is going down. And when the health bar reaches 0, the lockbox explodes. You might have missed that if you're decompressing boom.zip and stuff. But so what's in boom.zip? It's got the lockbox, it's got the magic ball, it's got the 2 sounds, it's got the explosion image. So the lockbox has a health bar, and you'll see as the ball hits it, the health goes down. And when the ball hits or collides with the box, it tints the box red to kind of also indicate it's taking damage. And it's staying red now because the ball has come to rest on top of it, so the collision never ended. But if we can knock the ball off, you'll see it. Well, if you could without it exploding, you'd see it go back to white potentially. All right, now I'm going to start a new design. So obviously it's a physics app. Obviously we also need to get these resources on screen. So let me start by adding the lockbox. So I've got all my stuff in a folder called Boom. So I'm going to add the lockbox. I'm going to set the project folder to that folder. I'm going to resize the lockbox a little bit so you guys, size it to your own liking. And I want to add the magic ball. We've got the full color exploding ball. I'm also going to resize it. It seems a little large. But again, this is all a subjective matter of style and taste that you guys may do your own thing. I need a ground. I'll put it down here and obviously widen it up. I'm going to fill it with something. I'll try to stick to the example. So I've got a green grass to land on, and I need the background if I want that sky background. So I've just added a background rectangle. So I'm recentering the ground, and then I need a gradient. I want to do that sky gradient. I'm going to call it sky, and colors are kind of a dark blue. Not sure, something that may be too dark. And it's lighter on the bottom. I need to move the gradient up so that I can apply it to the background. I'm going to name the background. I'm going to try to be better about naming all my stuff. So this is the sky background rectangle. I'm going to option click fill color, and add the sky or apply the sky gradient. I hit that pretty close. I want the ground in front, so I'm going to switch the order so that now it looks like this. And then the other background here is the ground, so I'm gonna name it ground. We might as well start physics, see where we're at, do a save and a test. So I'm going to save this as Boom Demo. Well, so here's the test. So you might be wondering, well, I thought you added a lockbox, and indeed I did add a lockbox, but I got it out of order. So I need that lockbox after the sky for sure. There we go. And it's just hanging in midair there awkwardly. So let's add the health bar. So the health bar is just a rectangle. It's a rectangle I'm going to size and color and place carefully. Try to do it carefully. So I'm going to size it so that it'll just fit inside this sort of edge here. And the exact placement and color and everything is completely up to you, but I'm going to fill it with a green, a healthy green. And then I'm going to create a display group to link those two together. So I'm going to call the display group lockbox, and I'm going to add the lockbox to the lockbox display group, and I'm going to add the health bar to the lockbox display group. All right, quick save to make sure this looks like what we expect in the simulator. All right, I'm going to do a little rearranging. I'm going to put the stack over here. I'm going to move the design and resize the window a little bit, see if I can get a little more screen space in my recording area. I'm using as much of my recording area as I can. All right, let's turn on physics, see where we're at with physics. So I'm going to head to physics. I'm going to set up physics. That automatically goes to the top of the stack. I want to add the lockbox, but I'm going to add the lockbox display group. I can't click on the lockbox display group in the design, so I click on it in the stack, and I'm going to now add body to physics. So let's see what we got. All right, so I don't know if you guys were watching. I'm just testing to make sure that worked, and the lockbox obviously flies off the screen. So I forgot to add the ground, right? I haven't yet added the ground. So I'm going to select the ground. I'm going to add it as a body, and I'm going to switch it to a static physics body. That should now get the lockbox bouncing, kind of like we would expect. I mean, there's multiple right ways to get this to work. You do not have to follow a precise order. Let's add the runtime and the tap so that we can tap the ball anywhere. So I'm going to add the runtime object or the runtime table. I'm going to add the tap listener. So third from the top tap. So this enables me, like we learned last time, to tap anywhere on the screen. I don't have to have a target to tap on. It's anything. If there was a reason why you didn't want to do that, I could have added the tap listener to that background. You can actually obviously use the background for more than just being a background, if it makes sense to. So I want to drop the ball where the tap occurred. So I need to move the magic ball into the on tap handler. So I've selected magic ball in my stack. I'm going to hit the move image into function button. There's only one function at this point, so I'm going to say OK. While magic ball is still selected, I'm going to go ahead and add it as a physics body. And I need to relocate it. So I'm going to hijack this snippet and move it down and just change it to reposition magic ball. And you can leave that print if you want to or get rid of it. But I'm going to say the magic ball is object 2, so I'm going to say object 2.x and object 2.y equals event.x, event.y. Let's have a look now. So I did this last night too. The balls are weird, right? This one ball is sunk into the ground, so maybe the ground is spongy over here, or the physics shape is screwed up. So if you're not sure what's going on, go back to setup physics, switch it to hybrid, and look at the display shapes. Otherwise, I assume you know what's going on. We're going to head to the add body for the magic ball, and we're going to fix it by saying use a circle, sync it to the current size of the circle, 32. And if you wanted to, you could make it slightly under 32 so that it sunk into the grass a little bit. Here's I hope the fixed version. All right, the ball appears to be working nicely. I guess let's add sound effects and let's add tinting. So for the sound effects, I'm going to head to the actions palette. I'm going to load sound. The sound I want is the low bump. I'm going to move it up to the top because that's where I do that kind of stuff. And so then the question is, okay, I have the sound, but when do I want it to play? So I want it to play anytime the ball hits something, certainly. Let's add it to the ball to begin with. So I'm going to select the magic ball, and I'm going to add the collision listener. I'm going to need the collision listener on the ball anyway, so to some extent it makes sense to put it on the ball. And Drawnicode's added the handler. I'm going to move it into the function just for organizational purposes. So every time there's a tap, a magic ball will be created, repositioned to the location of the tap, and hooked up to the collision listener, in which case this snippet will run. So I want actually to play the sound to begin with. So let's add a play sound script object. There is only one sound, and I want that inside of this collision handler. So for the time being, let's just, as an initial test, let's just move it into that collision handler function. So now I do have two functions, and I have to pick. I want the collision handler. In my stack, that's object 16. So now the sound should play when the ball hits anything. Let's see if that is in fact the case. There we go. Should be for the ground as well. Yep. Okay, so that's a start. Obviously, if you want the lockbox to make a sound as well, you'd do the same thing with the lockbox, is add the collision listener, or you could add it to the runtime, or you could add it to the ground when the box hits the ground if you want the sound to occur, or maybe a different, heavier, more of a thud kind of sound, which I haven't supplied us with. Let's fix the sound too, because let's look at our function here. Our function has the default snippet. For me, this is object 17, has a lot going on, which we talked about a bit, but just to re-explain, what I'm doing in here is trying to name the object that I collided with. So I've attached this to the magic ball. So all of the syntax here is trying to identify what the magic ball just hit. It could have hit the ground, or it could have hit the lockbox, because that's the only two things that are in the physics engine. So what all of this is doing is double checking, first off, that we're only working in one phase. Remember, there's two phases, began and ended. And then within the began phase, I'm double checking that what I hit still exists, hasn't been display removed. If it has a name, then I'm going to say object 2 colliding with that name. If it doesn't have a name but does have an ID, then I'm going to say object 2 colliding with that ID. So that's what is going to get us this information out at the console. I really only care about the lockbox, not the ground. I'm not going to be tinting the ground or inflicting damage on the ground. And the lockbox is actually a display group, and so its ID is actually the word lockbox. So we're going to make use of that in a second, but you'll notice the play sound is not in this logic statement. it's on its own, which means it's actually technically playing twice for every collision. We talked about that last time. The fix would be to put it inside of this began phase. So we could make a little room here and paste the play sound right there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select play sound, and then from the edit menu, I'm going to say copy this object's code to clipboard, which is the third option down. And then I'm just going to paste that right here and indent it so that my code still is readable. Can't count apparently and talk. Okay, you could delete this play sound. I'm just going to remove it from the generated code so you see it grays out in the stack. I don't know if you'll notice a difference here or not, but now the sound is only played once per collision. Okay, tinting. Tinting's easy with images. You just set the fill color and it adds that fill color as a tint. We've done that in several homeworks to to fun effect. The key to tinting though is we have to untint it, right? And so you will untint the box by setting its fill color to white. So white doesn't actually mean white when you're tinting images. It means clear the tint off. So I want to do that as well in the snippet. I need to put the tinting in the logical structure here. Although I need another phase. So instead of just end, I'm going to add an else down here. And so if you're not in the began phase, you're in the ended phase. You could do else if event.phase double equals ended, but I don't think there's any other way you get into this line of code otherwise. We could just get rid of all of this but the test for ID. Well, no, that should work. I'm going to select all the way down to here and delete it. So what I'm ending up with is just if event.other.id is not equal to nil and event.other.id equals lockbox. And I'll peek at the console just to make sure I didn't do something like capitalize it differently or deviate, but there we go. It's just called lockbox. So I'm checking here to see if the event.other.id exists and if it is in fact lockbox, in which case I want to tint the lockbox. The lockbox is object1. That's the first thing we added. So I'm going to say object1 set fill color 0.800. That's not a super bright red, but kind of I think a nice red. Let's save it and double check that I haven't goofed it up already. So what we should see is as soon as the ball hits it, it should tint red. And it's going to stay red because we haven't removed the tint. So let's remove the tint. Heading back to the snippet, I'm in the else. I essentially want to do the exact same thing I did up here. So I'm going to copy all of this and paste it down here. But obviously I'm going to change the color. So I'm going to go to the set fill color and I'm going to set fill color to 1, which is the shorthand for white. So let's see if it works. Yeah. So we've got sound effects, we've got physics, we've got our UI, we've got sound effects. We don't have the health bar. We've done nothing with the health bar. All right, so if we want to adjust the health bar, we're going to do a couple things. First off, to the lockbox group, I'm going to add a health attribute. I'm going to have to do that in a snippet. So I'm heading to snippets, and I'm going to say new snippet, and lockbox setup. All I'm going to say is lockbox dot health equals 100, and I'm going to move that up right below the lockbox, which is where you'd expect to find it. So there obviously is no health attribute for display groups, but we want one for lockboxes, so I just add it. So we have a lockbox now with a health of 100. What we want to know now is how much damage did the ball do? Since we already have collision on the ball, let me also add the other listener to the ball. So here's the secret of damage. Select the magic ball, say add listener, and select post collision. Post collision is the listener where we'll get the force of the collision, which we'll use as a proxy for damage. I'm going to also move it back into the tap function. I'm going to put it right below collision, just because that's always how I order these. And let's peek at the snippet. So this default snippet's even more complex. But what it's doing should be familiar. It is checking to see what data that it can report on exists. And if it can report on something, it's giving you an update on what collision just occurred and how big the force of the collision was. So let's just run this and peek at the console and see what's going on. So when the ball hits, you see the collision and you see these force calculations. And then at the very end, you see this kind of dump of collisions. And that's essentially as the ball settles, it bounces so little, but it does bounce. And so we've got this whole stream of tiny amounts of collision force as it settles on the lockbox. But the big number here is what's the damage initially? So the initial damage strike is 76. This is as far as I know, it's unitless, but it could be newtons, pounds force, whatever. But it's 76. We gave our health box a health of 100, so if we just took 76, that would deal a pretty staggering blow to the lockbox. But we can play around with all of this. What I want to do is decrease the health of the lockbox and then reflect that decrease in the health bar. So I want the health bar to get shorter and shorter as the damage accumulates. So I'm in this huge snippet, and you can see to get the force, the syntax is event.force. And so why is it here? Why isn't it in collision? And so the answer essentially is the physics engine can't calculate the force of the collision until once it's complete. Once it's complete, it can do this calculation and supply you, the programmer, with this data. So to make that work, there's a separate listener called post collision, and that's what we've made use of. So everywhere in here, we're dealing with what happens after the collision. So I want to know if it hit a lockbox. See what I can delete. Oh, well, I may have gone a little too far, but I want, if event.other.id, is not equal to nil, and event.other.id equals lockbox. So essentially the same careful checking we just did to make sure we're hitting a lockbox. If we don't do this, then we run the risk of when the ball hits the ground that we inflict damage to the lockbox, which would be unfair to the lockbox. I think most of us would agree. So we want to limit our infliction of damage to the lockbox. So when the damage occurs, I want to update the health. So I'll say lockbox.health equals lockbox.health minus event.force. And maybe I'm going to divide that by 2 to start, just to see how these numbers go. And then I'm just going to move this out of the way a little bit because it's not really part of what we're doing. But when we just looked at the force, I also want to look at lockbox health. So I'm going to do the same thing and say print lockbox health equals lockbox.health. So this will give me a bit of an idea of what's happening to the health during the collisions. Oh, and I need to get down here. Well, so you can see in total all of these collisions took about 90% of the health away. So that's a pretty big pretty big amount of damage. You could play with that. Obviously, it depends on what you think the magic lock ball or the magic ball is made out of, or if it's magical nature somehow and doubles the damage, or I don't know. But we want to work on the health bar then. So we want to be in here because we only want to change the health bar when the health has been changed, and we only change the health when the magic ball collides with a lockbox. So the health bar, which is now off screen, and I forgot to label it, so it doesn't show up my stack descriptively. So I'm going to say health status bar, so that now if I glance over the stack, it's obvious that that is object 6. So it's never too late to make good decisions about labeling your stack. Object 6, there is an attribute called Y-scale, and it works on a scale of 0 to 1 or 100%. But the thing to know about it is it also goes negative and just interprets that as reversing the direction of drawing the shape. So if you go below 0, the health bar will then start to grow again, apparently. I want to set the Y scale to the health of the lockbox divided by 100 to give me this sort of percent scale that I'm looking for. But this is not going to work perfectly. I think we'll see that. Maybe not with the first ball. So you can see we've taken off 90% of the health, but if we hit that again, do you see it going back up? So it looks like it's gaining health, but it's actually gaining negative health. So I want to stop that, right? So we'll take advantage of a built-in math library feature, and we'll say that the minimum we're going to allow is that lockbox health, or I'm going to say 0.05. And so here's another design kind of decision you get to make. For testing this kind of stuff, I always want to see the lockbox bar when it goes to virtually 0, so that I know that it's still there and not adjusting. If I set it to 0, or something really too small, it just disappears. This is working, right? I mean, this has got tinting. Oh, it's going back up. All right, what did I do? Oh, the minimum. It should be the maximum. Right, so if this goes negative, I want to take this value. I had that backwards. All right, here we go. Now we should see, yes. No matter what happens, we still get this minimum health displayed. All right, this essentially concludes chapter 13, and now I want to add the next step, which is when that lockbox hits minimum health, I want it to explode. So how do we know when the lockbox is out of health, when it is quote unquote, dead? Well, it is right in here after we update the health. So we can say if lockbox.health is less than or equal to 0, then let's print boom, not boon, boom. And do you want to tint the lockbox? Maybe we want to tint it black as a starter. So I'll say the image of the lockbox is object 1. So I'll say object 1 set fill color, I don't know, 0.3. Let's see what that does, just as that works. So what we should see is the lockbox. Yeah, it is tinting black now, but the tint's being removed by the ended collision phase. But at the very end, if the ball's resting on it, it'll stay black. And we should see boom at the console. Yes, there we go, boom, 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 boom. So we don't want all these booms. We want a boom, a real boom. We want it to explode. Okay, so explosions aren't built in to Khronos/Solr 2D. I mean, everything else is, and how you do it, then an explosion is totally up to you. The way I show you how to do it in the book is I'm going to use an image and a transition on the image. I'm going to use a sound effect, and I'm going to remove the item that is destroyed. And if I do all those three things quickly and time it carefully, what it ends up looking like is kind of an explosion, a cartoony explosion, which is fine for this cartoonish world. You could use a really accurate explosion image if you wanted to, but that's not how I did it. So you could put all that code in here. It makes a little more sense to me though to make a function for it. I could call the function before I create it. I guess I'm going to say boom, and then what I'm blowing up is the lockbox. So, but I need this function now. So I'm going to head to the functions palette here. I'm going to say new function. I'm going to highlight new function and change its name. I want it to be boom. And I'm going to call the parameter t just as shorthand for a target of the boom. What is being boomed, quote unquote. So we need, let's start with the sound effect. I'm going to load the sound effect. That's in actions, load sound, boom sound, appropriately named. I'm going to move it up so that it loads with my other sound. I need the play sound then, so I'm going to select play sound, and I'm going to select boom sound, and that I'm going to move into my new boom function. So I'm going to hit the move play sound into function, and I'm going to select boom. As a utility function, I'm going to move this up a ways. Let's say up here, maybe. That should play the boom sound. Let's see if it does it or if I've introduced an error already. All right, so why did it do that? It did that because we haven't actually removed the lockbox. So it's, as that ball rolls across it, that's technically a collision as it rolls pixel by pixel. And so since the box is dead and a collision's occurring, our boom function is being called and the sound is being played. So you're hearing just that whole mash of as many simultaneous boom sounds, I think, as can be played at one time. So that's not what we want, obviously. I mean, you argue it's cool, I guess, but we need to do some work here. So we've got a nice snippet. I do need the explosion image, so let me load that as well. That's a display object, it's an image, it's explosion.ping. I'm going to move it off screen because I don't want it on screen until I want it on screen. I'm going to make it a little smaller too because I'm going to use a transition to expand it rapidly when the explosion occurs. And so you could make it even smaller. So yeah, I'm deviating from what I did last night, so I'm sure that'll cause a problem, but we'll see. Doesn't really matter where you load that, but I'm going to put it up with the other lockbox. There we go. Doesn't really matter. This looks narrow now. Oh, it is narrow now. That's because I screwed it up somehow. That looks a little better. Okay, so where are we? We're in the function's default snippet in the boom function, which has nothing in it. We're not concerned about phase here because this is being called from the correct phase, so it's not going to run this twice. So there's a few things we want to do. One is we want the image to appear. So I'm going to move the image to the target's location. The explosion's object 26. So it's object 26.x, object 26.y equals t.x, t.y. And then I want to remove the lockbox. If it exploded, it should be no longer there. So I'm going to say display.remove. See if I've deviated so far from my practice that I've screwed it up. Hey. So it is working. We're not done with the fine tuning at all. So the other thing I want to do is transition the size of this and also fade it out to give it more of a realistic appearance. So I want a transition that's in actions again. You guys have done lots of transitions all the way towards the bottom. I want to transition the explosion, which is why I selected it first. And let's set up the transition. We can start with the second. I want to change the alpha to 0. And I want to scale the thing up big. So let's start with quadrupling the size, see if that gets us something we like. Let's see what that looks like. So the box will start taking damage. Oh man. Oh. All right. Oh, sorry, the transition's just here. I need to move the transition into the boom function. So I'm selecting the transition and I'm going to move it into boom. That should do it. I don't know why I didn't do that, but here we go. All right. So certainly lots of things we could play around. The transition's your opportunity to kind of fine tune, how long does it take? Maybe we want this to take a little bit longer. Let's do 1.5 seconds. Maybe we want it to, create a bigger splash on screen. Lots of stuff. Or maybe we want it lots quicker. Let's change it to, I don't know, 600. That's a little over half a second. Oh, I missed it. Well, that's better. You could certainly play around with that to get it looking like, exactly like you want. But essentially, an explosion is almost like a little magic trick. It's like, the hand is quicker than the eye thing. You're snatching the lockbox off screen and replacing it with an explosive image. At the same time, you're playing an explosive sound. The chapter goes into way more detail on more realistic effects of the explosion, like when it explodes, shouldn't that affect other stuff on screen? Shouldn't there be an explosive force radiating out from the center of the explosion? Yeah, in some games that absolutely would make sense. So chapter 14 goes into how to do that. It's obviously a little more complicated from a math standpoint, but totally doable. I think we hit all the features I wanted to hit on this. So we've got a crate, it takes damage, it records the damage in the health bar, and when the damage hits 0, it explodes. Boom. So chapter 13 has a lot more to dig into as well that we don't have time to do. And chapter 14, we've just touched on the first shot of an explosion because it made sense to tie it in to our last day. So chapter 13, you've learned about collisions, you've learned a lot of physics, and you've learned about explosions as well beyond this chapter. But the health bar, taking damage or reducing health, detecting when something should be done or dead or whatever you want to call that, destroyed, and then doing something when that happens. You're now masters of all of that. And that's where I want to end up today. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following along.